Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching This All TC, and I get so many requests for tier lists. I love to see it actually. People are interested in the game. I let's just say that tier lists are complicated. So instead of just giving you one competitive tier list, I'm going to give you three. And if you look really closely, you might catch a fourth one. So first of all, I'm going to do my first post-ToC tier list. Now this is the tier list I had. This, I think, conforms very closely to the community sort of sense of the game. From seeing people on Discord, on Facebook, on Reddit talk about the games they've played, just generally, this is where I was prior to writing lists. After looking through the ToC, looking at the points changes, things like that, I think Skaven got brought down to earth, but is still kind of in a hugely advantageous place. Tarantulos obviously is terrifying. Just with one box, they're just B tier, but otherwise, once you go one box, but you source some extra spiders, goes to A, and then once you have, the fully operational battle station of Tarantulos, they're just head and shoulders above every other faction. But I think that there's a really fascinating and varied metagame in the B tier, and the A and B tier. Though all those B tier factions can touch the A tier pretty well. And then, the ToC changes to, say, Iron Golems or Tzeentch Demons were pretty brutal to them. I do think they helped Stormcast a little bit. The interesting thing about this tier list, so I made this before I wrote any lists, any kind of analytics, anything like that. And I think, like I said before, this kind of conforms to what a lot of other folks in the community, I think, are thinking as well. But a funny thing happened when I wrote some lists and sort of put it through an algorithm based on, what's in the list, what the lists are capable of, etc. My computer had some different opinions than me. And so this is going to be based on the base game. This is based on the same rating system that I used, or very close to the same rating system that I used for my competitive tier list about 10 months ago for the previous version of Warcry. One thing that I noticed is if you got no ToC buffs, you lost major ground. So for example, Tzeentch Arcanites, Untamed Beasts, Slaanesh, Lumineth, anything that got that got nerfed even a little bit or just didn't get a buff, really lost ground because so many more factions were buffed than nerfed in the ToC. And once I started actually putting lists together and kind of looking at what their capabilities were, I found that some of the more subtle buffs and nerfs had made bigger changes than what my weak human mind had been able to kind of grok beforehand. One is the Sylvaneth list, when you just have all of those underworlders along with just the heavy hitters that Sylvaneth already had. That's just like a totally different ball game. Scions and Stormcast Eternals were also buffed in a big way. The Stormcast Eternals buffs, I think, really help them to, it's funny, it doesn't let you fit more Stormcast into a list, but it does let you upgrade your lists from, if you're running 5 Stormcast, it used to be you had to do, 1 Stormcast leader and then either Gryph-hound spam or just kind of the very base troops. Now, in all these Stormcast lists, you can have 5 Stormcast and be running 3 fancy Stormcast. And by fancy Stormcast, I mean, say, Prosecutors or Dracolines or the Judicator with the special crossbow that does 10,000 damage, stuff like that. And it really helps Stormcast. I think Stormcast Warrior Chamber was a huge beneficiary of that. The other Stormcast got helped too, but, so did everyone else, so they kind of stayed the same. Also, things like Corvus and Gloomspite Gitz took pretty big nerfs. So Gloomspite Gitz getting access to Snurk Sourtongue was a big deal, and that's why I had them, pretty high in my previous tier list. But when you look at how bad the Gabapalooza got nerfed, so the strongest Gloomspite Gitz lists before were making pretty big use out of the Gobapalooza, specifically the one that does a ton of damage. With that pretty big nerf, I think it really changes the lists you can make out of there, and they can still do really powerful things. I think everything in this B tier is doing really great stuff, but it's not quite as scary as it was before, because your ability to flood the board with anything other than netters has been seriously hampered with Gloomspite, other than Snurk, who is amazing. Another thing is my algorithm still really loves Aetherwings, so even though their points got jacked through the roof, there's still just so many missions that Aetherwings just auto-win, that once you actually sort of do some analytics based on how likely Aetherwings are to just auto-win you the game, Vanguard become much better. Thinking about some flaws in the in the computer tier list, I noticed a few things. So one, my algorithm really disrespects lists that can only do one thing. So Cruel Boys, previously with the ally rule, it was really easy to put in an Iron Jaws or a Bone Splitter's ally into Cruel Boys to supercharge their grots. And the way you could do this was, you knew based on the base game that one of your deployment groups, your shield, was really likely, around 70%, maybe higher, likely to be on the board turn 1. So you could put your ally in with, a whole bunch of your pot grots, and then wah them, and so then just get them into position. People were winning pacifist games with Cruel Boys, where they would just overwhelm on the objective so much that they didn't even have to kill anything to win the game. Without the ally rule, you can't really do that. You can't just alpha block, is essentially what that strategy was, where you just block off your opponent from getting anywhere with just a huge wall of pot grots. You can't really do that in the current ally rule, and so my algorithm doesn't really like them anymore. Tzeentch Arkanites, I think Skynet might just be wrong about them. I had them as the 8th best warband in the game, just extremely scary. All they have is a pile of mobile damage dealers. So my algorithm disrespects them because it's like, well, this is a one-trick pony. Personally, I think they're really strong because that one trick is ridiculous. So that's one place where I think Skynet might be wrong. Also, Red Harvest and Tome of Champion missions are a little bit different than previous ones, so my current algorithm might be overvaluing Chaff now, but I refuse to change it because Chaff is just such a backbone of this game that I need to see it proven to me that Chaff isn't important before I'm willing to really change my view on that. Definitely check back here in a month's time to see if my old self has been proven wrong. Overall, I think Skynet's probably got a better handle on the game than my pre-list building tier list was. I think a lot of things, there's just a lot of stuff I was underrating before. I think, Skynet has Nurgle Demons really high, and once I actually look at the way you can just throw down 14 models in a Nurgle Demons warband and pump up all their movement, basically Nurgle Demons is doing with no allies what Cruel Boys was doing when you could take allies. For those who don't know, when I'm referring to not being able to take allies anymore, GW with the Tome, with their Adepticon rules, they're just very strongly suggesting that tournaments don't include allies, and that allies essentially just be for matched play between friends. This is not the space where I'm going to sort of say yay or nay on that change, but it does really massively affect things. And I think Nurgle Demons are the new Cruel Boys, and kind of took Skynet pointing that out to me for me to really figure it out. Nurgle Demons and Soulblight Gravelords are essentially doing what Cruel Boys with an ally could do. My algorithm still thinks Tarantulos is head and shoulders above everyone. Spiders not getting nerfed was a big mistake. That's all we really need to say there. There's also some interesting movement at the bottom of the list. I think the points changes actually really helped Nurgle Rotbringers. Once I was building lists with them, the Lord of Affliction, the chief sitter on flies, got a pretty massive points change, is now just 265 points, and it completely changes what you can do with their lists. You still only really fit in 6 models, but the quality of the models at your disposal with 6 of them, and being able to have this, it only moves 6 inches. It's very slow for a flyer, but it is still a flyer with 6-inch move. I mean, 6-inch move is fast. And it does a ton of damage. It's really hard to kill. I think it's an incredible piece. If it weren't tied down by being in Nurgle Mortals, it would be kind of known as one of the scarier models in the game. As is, I think it's enough to get them out of F tier, even if it only brings them up to D. Another thing, a lot of the bespoke warbands that were kind of killing it before, they, a lot of them took nerfs. The classic meme that the bespoke warbands can't compete with the AOS ones has always just been so painfully wrong, and so frustrating to hear. But the ToC did do a little bit to fuel the fires there, because I think there were very few meaningful buffs among the bespoke warbands. Some of them are meaningful. Some of them, for example, I have Unmade pretty high here. The nerf to the chaff unit in the Unmade triggered me to change my Unmade list, which actually just, it nerfed you into actually creating correct lists. I've heard people talk about 2 Blissbringer lists, and I was kind of ignoring that in favor of spamming that chaff unit, which is solid but not better than other chaff units. But I do think once you're looking at 2 Blissbringers, the things you can do as far as having them in different deployment groups, being able to screen for them, being able to combo in multiple places at once, is really, really powerful, and I think worthy of being in B tier here. I also really underestimated how much the nerfs to Corvus Cabal kind of hurt them. You end up with the same list, but just downgrading 2 of your spears to daggers, but man, are the spears better than the daggers. So that's just kind of going around the horn there with some of those changes. Here's my sort of synthesis tier list. This is what I would actually say is my current tier list, where I'm at. This is kind of taking my previous opinions, filtering them through the algorithm. The only change I would make here, I'm sorry, is talking it through, I would put Tzeentch Arcanites at the bottom of A tier. I think Tzeentch Arcanites are really good. I don't think they're quite as good as some of the other stuff in A, but I actually think now that they're better than anything in B. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with this list. I think it definitely is a little bit different than some of what the community's talking about right now, but I do think it's solid. I think Seraphon, for example, I had always been putting them kind of a little bit lower after sort of first looking at the sort of nerf to skink blowpipes. However, it's crazy how deep Seraphon's bench is when you look at what skink handlers are capable of, when you look at what salamanders are capable of, when you look at just the fact that they can have flyers plus chaff, but actually really solid. I mean, Pterodon Chiefs, or not the Pterodon Chief, but the Pterodon unit champion is a really solid flyer. It's not what I would call a dragon in terms of its damage and durability, but it's this really incredible utility flyer, like what Kradron Overlords has, what Sylvaneth has, stuff like that. I stand by what I was saying before about how I think the A plus B metagame here is really fascinating. I think if Tarantulas didn't exist, I think we would have an incredible metagame with everything in Warcry. I think it would really hold up. Now, there's a few things to think about, like compared to Skynet, I just downgraded some of the Stormcast options. I'm still skeptical that Stormcast Warriors list is that good. I'll pop it up on screen here, but it's basically a Prosecutor, 2 of the Judicators that do 10,000 damage, a Gryph-hound, and then one of the 3-inch move super tough leaders that just got a huge drop in points. So I think you can pay 210 points for the Paladin leader with 2-inch range, and all of the Paladin leaders just got huge point buffs. I get why. Basically, I think that there's a lot to like about Stormcast Warrior Chamber in Warcry now. I think they have some very legitimate tools to overcome their numbers problem, but I don't think it's enough to put them as high as Skynet was putting them. Otherwise, I'm really happy with this. Let's see. Also, how much to fear the shambling hordes? I forgot that I put that there. So basically, Soulblight and Nurgle. So they've got 3-inch move chaff that point for point is just way more efficient than anything else in the game other than spiders. So the question is, are there abilities like Shambling Horde for movement, or the other movement ability that's in the Underworld's warband, or like for Nurgle, Sloppity Bile Piper's movement ability? Are those abilities enough to turn those sort of incredible point-for-points efficiency fighters that Nurgle and Soulblight Gravelords have into actual sort of usefulness on the board? That's the real question. I think the answer is probably yes, but it needs real testing. So I can't put them ahead of Skaven or Ogres for me, but otherwise I would say they're very serious and very worthy to be feared. I'm excited to hopefully run into them at Adepticon to kind of test that out. We'll see. I'm very excited there. Now, so this is sort of all going through these tier lists. By the way, I'm still respecting Cruel Boys at least a little bit to put them at the top of B. I haven't talked about Slaanesh yet. Let me just mention that the mirror is still the mirror. Otherwise, the fact that the list got nerfed when so many other lists are getting buffed, this mirror list isn't that much worse than the previous list was. The problem is so many factions just got huge buffs that I think they've been leapfrogged a little bit. They're still very good. I think everything in B tier can absolutely win a tournament. Everything in B tier, if you get lucky, you can win against Tarantulos. And then you can basically go to toe-to-toe with anything in A if you're using B. You know, anything below that, even if you get lucky, Tarantulos is still going to beat you. And, you know, you're going to have a huge uphill battle against anything in A as well. But let me talk about some reasons to ignore the tier list. Some reasons why tier lists right now for Warcry are, just feel free to ignore them for these 4 reasons. The first being scenario variance, right? Every faction has auto-loss scenarios. That's just kind of what's built into Warcry every once in a while. And GW is really pushing 1-day 4-round tournaments for how they want people to structure their events. There's going to be 3 of such tournaments at Adepticon in 2 weeks. Hoping to sort of organize more tournaments in the future. I am hoping to try and organize a Minnesota tournament. If you know anyone who sort of has the resources to put up a space for tournaments in Minnesota, let me know, let them know. I'd love to connect with them. But for now, the fact that there's 4-round tournaments, each scenario has specific needs. So if you know the scenarios ahead of time, you should be building to them. And based on what it looks like for a tournament, different factions are going to be in different places, right? So, you really need to be aware of kind of the macro types of scenarios that are out there. For example, treasure missions are basically auto wins for Aether Wings or any dragons. So things like Stormcast Vanguard, Flesh Eater Courts, Ideneth, Sylvaneth, Soulblight Gravelords, Gloomspite, Tzeentch, KO. Those factions are going to really dominate treasure missions. Objective missions give a huge advantage to the chaff warbands, so like Soulblight Gravelords, Skaven, Ogres, Nurgle. Those are going to really dominate the objective missions. There's also the positioning missions, where you're not just looking for objectives, but it's like the 4 corners one or the platforms one, stuff like that. Those really favor picking 3 fights and winning 2 of them. And that's things that like Skaven, Daughters of Cain, Slaanesh, those can really dominate those missions. You also have hunter missions that favors not so much gun lines, because gun lines take a long time to kill their thing, right? Like if you have a whole bunch of skinks, it takes you many activations to kill what you're trying to kill, and your opponent can go in and engage what hasn't gone yet in the round. But big artillery pieces, like a Thunder Fist, like a Knight Venator, like a Judicator, KO volley guns kind of half count for this. The salamander half counts for this. Artillery pieces like that are really good in hunter missions, as are things like gorehounds. All of the dragons are like that. Things like rat ogres that are kind of fast and do a bunch of damage. Things like the Slangor Slakehorn are really good in hunter missions. All of those kinds of models. And those are really the four macro types. And if you're seeing the missions ahead of time at a tournament and it has, say, 2 of the same, you should really be building towards that, knowing that, half of the missions in this tournament are heavily favoring, this group of 7 factions. Which kind of goes into another half point, right? So the scenarios have been changing a little bit. Red Harvest and ToC have some kind of systematic differences in terms of victory conditions than the scenarios ahead of them did. For example, the number of chaff missions, the number of missions that just heavily favor spamming a ton of chaff, are not eliminated in Red Harvest and ToC, but they are significantly reduced, which potentially really changes what's good in Warcry just on a blanket level, right? They've also put treasure missions to the forefront, which I think is really unfortunate. For all that reducing the number of heavy chaff missions has made the game more balanced, increasing the number of treasure missions is just awful, honestly. It's the worst decision they could have made. It's worse than if they had just continued chaff dominance, because at least chaff, you can fight it by choosing fighters that efficiently remove chaff. There is nothing you can do against a 10-inch flyer in a treasure mission other than bringing a 10-inch flyer yourself. That's just straight up. So treasure missions are basically unplayable, and yet there's a ton of them in the new stuff, right? So if we look at the ToC, movement and shooting are just way more important, and then Red Harvest, the same thing is true because there's so much terrain everywhere. Red Harvest, I was talking about this in my Slaanesh video, but it's pretty late in the video, you might not have seen. Basically, Red Harvest is much more forgiving for 3-inch move because you can just identify what the most important place on the board is, and you can just plod there with your 3-inch move, just double move in the first round, maybe have to double move again in the second round, but you can get there, and then there's plenty of rounds for you to affect the fight once you're there. However, it also really helps for, say, 5-inch move, 6-inch move fighters, because there's generally a lot of different objectives and a lot of different things to do. So while the cost of having 3-inch move compared to 4-inch move has been significantly reduced, the value of having, say, 8-inch move is increased because of how many things there are to do with your extra movement if you want to, right? As far as like the one treasure mission is about picking up 6 treasures, stuff like that. Then if we look at the ToC scenarios, it's so rough, right? Because 3 of them are among the best missions we have. If you were to rank sort of the 10 best missions, I think Trophy Kills, Fleeting Glory, and Nexus of Power would all be really high. If not top 5, they would easily be top 10 in the best scenarios, the best missions we have. But unfortunately, Scour, Forsaken Orrery, and Hidden Treasures are a little more iffy. Forsaken Orrery especially, it's the one where there's only 1 treasure, and it deals damage to you, which I'm sure they were thinking about Aetherwings when they made it. But what they weren't thinking about was all the 10-inch flyers, like big flyers in the game. And unfortunately, if you don't have a 10-inch flyer and they do, you auto-lose. If both sides have a 10-inch flyer, whoever goes first auto-wins. So that mission is awful. Hidden Treasures is essentially the same. The only difference being if you... it's the one where there starts with 1 treasure, then there's 3 treasures, then there's 5. The person with the 10-inch flyer is always going to be 1 point ahead. That's just how it is. The only hope is if their flyer is a huge percentage of their warband, maybe your whole warband, you just rush up and you try to table because they can't join the fight with their 10-inch flyer anymore, and so hopefully your warband is able to table theirs since you have such a advantage on points. And then there's nowhere for them to put the 5th treasure. But for the most part, those 2 missions are awful. And if any TOs are considering just doing their mission pack where you just roll to find out what mission you get, I really hope they consider removing those from the group because they're just unplayable. They're completely unplayable. So if we are going with these changing scenarios, we have to completely change the tier list. I think Tarantulos is still ridiculous because, you only have a 1 in 3 chance of getting those treasure missions. And they're still very playable there because they have the 8-inch move spiders. But for the most part, you're basically transferring everyone with access to a 10-inch move flyer up into A and B tier. OC-Arc Bone Reapers are in a really rough spot, though they did get some nice buffs with the ToC that kind of takes them out of the bottom. But they move up into B because they have those Morghast Archai that can move 8 inches, and so they're dominant in those treasure missions as well, even if they struggle on everything else. Things really change because having big 10-inch move flyers is really all that matters in the Tome of Champions, in that group of 6, because you just have a 1 in 3 chance of having something where a 10-inch flyer auto wins the game. So, this is all just to say that the scenarios you play matter way more than the tier list you're working off of, as far as what's good and what's not. And so then the other thing that matters is tactics. Tactics are much more important than strategy in Warcry. I tend to focus on strategy for a few reasons. One is my own skill set. I'm better at strategy than I am at tactics. I'm better at preparing before a match than I am at really cleverly thinking on my feet to kind of change things up and throw curveballs at my opponent based on what they've thrown at me. I do have one tactics video that I'm pretty proud of, actually, and I think everyone should go check it out. I'll hopefully link it here. You'll see a little card pop up here. Let's hope I remember. The other reason that I tend to focus more on strategy than tactics is I'm calling this the Goonhammer effect. They put out an article a while ago, though I've known this for some time before that. But basically it's the fact that most consumers of competitive content are casual players who are still more interested in competitive content than casual content because they want to know what's good so that they can balance their casual games around what's good. And that is always going to be in the back of my mind when I'm making content for this channel, is sort of thinking about competitive in order to use it in casual. And I think for that sort of purpose, you want to balance the starting point for your casual games, but then, the tactics is the fun part, right? The part that you figure out yourself, the part that's really fun on your own tabletop. And so me lecturing you about how to play the game, I think is a lot less valuable than me sort of putting out lists, analyzing lists for people to kind of set up their games with. Finally, no matter how much someone explains tactics to you, there are some things that you can just execute on the board, but there's a lot of sort of thinking on your feet that's required. And if you're struggling with it, me just kind of telling you to get good, bro, is just not helpful. So I don't tend to talk about that. However, it does mean that if you sort of have a really great tactical handle on how to use a B tier faction, that faction is going to be more powerful in your hands than any A tier faction would be for you. Because, positioning, target priority, ability timing, those are the real keys to victory in Warcry. And so I think that you need to know what your own personal tier list is going to be, even if that differs from what the wider tier list is. Now, the one caveat to that is I do think Tarantulos are so good that most B or C tier factions, even if you're an expert at that faction, you would still have more success with Tarantulos in your hands. The other thing to kind of go into tactics being more important than strategy is that, with the exception of Tarantulos, so here's just the histogram of how my list rating algorithm spat out all the lists in terms of their power level. And you can see, you know, the F tier and D tier, they're significantly below everyone. Tarantulos, way ahead of everyone. But the nerfs to Skaven and Vanguard, they would have been up here, by the way, kind of right by Tarantulos. The nerfs to Skaven and Vanguard really brought them back down to earth with everyone else. And the game is just incredibly balanced, with the exception of the F and S tiers. So for that reason, I think it kind of behooves you to not worry so much about, whether you're, oh no, I'm playing a B tier faction into an A tier, and more focus on just getting really good with your favorite faction. Now, there are going to be times where the A tier faction just has threats that you can't overcome if the player on that faction is just as good with their faction as you are with yours. That's going to be a problem for you. But for the most part, the game is reasonably balanced when you remove the outliers, which means that focusing on your own play is really the most important thing. We also have the availability meta, is what I'm calling it. So a lot of the best top factions in the game, they're kind of hard to put together. So Tarantulos still is only available in Red Harvest boxes. I was looking through eBay for them last week, and the only way I could find a second Tarantulos, because I have my first one, the only way I could find a second one was getting it with $1 million in shipping from somewhere in Russia, and who knows, right? So eBay was pretty brutal with that. So getting your second Broodmaster is tough if you don't want to just spend $1 bajillion. Now, Tarantulos with a ton of spiders but only one Broodmaster is still really solid, but that's kind of back down to earth. That's much more of an A tier faction than an S. A lot of other top lists are also really tough to track down. Sylvaneth, you need both Underworlds warbands to kind of put together the best things they can do. Cruel Boys, getting 1 million Pockrots is kind of tough to do. Slaves to Darkness is tough, not because it's hard to get your hand on Marauders, you can, it's just that, most people play Warcry with their AOS warbands, and nobody builds Marauders with flails, right? Most people I've seen, they build Marauders with the other weapon options that are better in AOS. It is really easy to put together those Slaves to Darkness warbands if you are specifically collecting for Warcry, but most people aren't going to have it. Same with Nurgle. If you're getting into Nurgle, I think the best Nurgle warbands, yes, it's mostly Plague Bringers or Plague Bearers, but you probably want to have 2 Sloppity Bile Pipers. Then you're going to need a few things like a Plague Drone or Beast of Nurgle. So you're getting a lot of different kits to try to put it together. Because of that, I think in most Warcry events, you're not going to see the most tuned lists, and you don't really need to worry about them that much. There's also, nerfs have changed the ideal list for a lot of factions, so a lot of people who had something that was really strong 2 months ago, it might not be that strong now. Seraphon, I played a game with them against Khorne Bloodbound, and that was sort of with the old really strong Seraphon list, but with the nerfs costing them a skink. And, them with one less skink that's 4 fewer shots every round to get those crits. That was actually a really big deal, and it felt really close. The Bloodbound faction won, although it did feel like on average it would have gone towards Seraphon, but the fact is it totally brought them down to earth towards sort of more normal factions. The ideal Seraphon list, I think because of that, has really changed, and you want to have some of your Underworlds fighters, and you want to think about skink handlers, things like that. So the same with Ideneth, where it used to be you might play 3 eels and then only Namarti. Now you probably want to think about maybe just 1 eel, The soul render has been buffed in a huge way to kind of make up for the eel nerfs. So do you include a soul render? Do you include any of the Underworlds fighters that are really solid? Right, there's a lot to think about that kind of changes what the ideal list is for a lot of these factions. Same with Beasts of Chaos, looking at the Cockatrice and Doom Bull nerfs. It makes you wonder if you want to have Dragon Ogres on your team, for example. So even some factions that got nerfed but are still really good, players might not have the new ideal list because the list has changed, right? So I think in most events, at least in the next few months, you're less likely to see some of the most tuned lists in the meta. And so the actual tier list is more based on kind of what you can put together with the models you have than I think it is, what the ceiling is for each faction. Finally, the biggest reason to ignore any tier list is that list building innovation still exists. I think prior to the ToC, I'm not sure I would have said that was true, but now I would absolutely say that it's true. I think we haven't thought about how a lot of the subtle changes have affected what's good. So, for example, all of the toughness 5 fighters are much more reasonably pointed now, which means you might actually see some of them. Which means, so before, it was really nice to have things that could efficiently kill toughness 3, and so I would really strongly, value having mostly toughness 3 fighters, but then having 1 or 2 really powerful strength 4 fighters that could just really explode chaff. Now, a lot of those really powerful strength 4 fighters that explode chaff, a lot of them don't line up very well with toughness 5 things, and you might see some of that in your games now. And so that might change what kind of damage profiles that you're interested in fielding. Other things are, how much has the shooting changed what you want to build with certain fighters? How much does that change what meta is out there? And then also, I think some of the points changes, some things are good now that we just haven't built around before. I've mentioned the Skink Handler Seraphon list a few times, but basically I think there's a lot of new stuff that would need to be tested. A lot of the Underworlds warbands bring in totally new abilities into the game that you get to play around with and experiment with. The perfect list is only public knowledge on a very small handful of factions. For the most part, most factions don't have a perfect list at the moment. For example, the list that I fed my algorithm for this video is not the list that I sort of workshopped on my Slanesh video with Mommy Slanesh, because we actually ended up coming up with a Sybarites list that I think we liked more than the list that either of us had brought to that video, that I think is really powerful and really interesting. So I think that there's a lot you can do for breaking the game that just hasn't been done yet. And I think that should excite anyone who's thinking about going to a Warcry event in the near future, whether it's competitive or not. But for the most part, I think that that's a really strong reason why, tier lists right now should be taken with a grain of salt. Not because they're not true. I actually do stand by that third tier list I showed you, and also the fourth one if we're only doing these horrible treasure missions. But even though I stand by it as far as the ceiling for most of those factions, I think the expectation, the EV for any given event is going to be really different from what you see there. So let's talk about if I were going to an event, which I am in 2 weeks, and if you're going to an event soon, what should you be worried about, right? Like I talked about the availability meta being a problem. So I wanted to kind of highlight some factions that I think I'm betting on seeing at any competitive event. One of them is Flesh Eater Courts. I think a lot of casual players have mostly discovered the top Flesh Eater Courts tools, right? A lot of factions that are really good, like say Tzeentch Arcanites, right? A lot of factions that are really good, you don't tend to see people when they're sort of sharing their warbands list. You don't tend to see them kind of showing that they've got the best tools for that, because there's so many things to build around. And it's not a knock on the people sharing their lists. It's just like there's so many things to do that aren't the ideal, or not ideal, but the most competitive thing to do. But with Flesh Eater Courts, the most competitive thing to do is kind of the thing to do. It's kind of hard to play that faction and not just kind of trip, fall, and end up with the most powerful thing in the faction. Unless you're just really into the Chosen of the King ability and you want to just play Chosen of the King, Flesh Eater Courts does have a really cool secondary list in it, but the main list of having an Infernal Courtier, another Flyer, and then a whole bunch of ghouls is sort of really easy to discover, and a lot of people figure it out really fast. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of Flesh Eater Courts. I myself am really strongly considering Flesh Eater Courts if it looks like Tome of Champions treasure missions are going to be a big part of Adepticon. Gloomspite Gitz is another one I think that you should really think about having to face what you're going to do if you have to see it. The reason being, Gloomspite Gitz was a huge scourge of Warcry's early days, and unlike the other scourge of early Warcry, Stormcast Vanguard, it didn't take a bunch of nerfs. And so a lot of people know that hoppers and netters are good. Now, I think if you're kind of playing the ideal sort of Gloomspite Gitz list, I think you want to include some stuff that's in there that isn't hoppers and netters, but netters are still the backbone. You're still going to include a Squig Hopper boss. And so I think a lot of casual players are going to have a bunch of netters and at least one Squig Hopper boss in their Gloomspite lists, which is going to be really strong. So I think you need to have a plan for how you're going to kill a Squig Hopper, how you're going to deal with the fact that a Squig Hopper is going to blow up a chaff unit in one hit at some point in your game, knowing that you're going to have an important fighter hit by a net at some point, so you need to be able to either wall off your important fighters from the netters or kill netters quickly. Those are things that I think you really need to be able to prepare for in any tournament you go to, just because I think Gloomspite Gitz are going to be a real sort of gatekeeper there. Soulblight Gravelords is another one. People love just throwing a bunch of skeletons out there and doing their Van Hell's Dance Macabre. I see a lot of posts about it, like on the Facebook, Reddit, stuff like that. That's another one. Also, just in general, Soulblight Gravelords are just really good, and something you really need to worry about and think about. How are you going to either outmaneuver these, 3-inch fighters, or survive once the 3-inch, hugely damaging fighters actually catch you? Finally, Skaven and Vanguard. A lot of people have those factions because those were the two best factions before the most recent Warcry changes in Red Harvest and the Tome of Champions. And a lot of people are priced in to those factions because of nerfs, and the nerfs weren't so big that those factions aren't good anymore. Because they're still good, they're just back down to earth. So I think you do need to have a plan for how to kill giant rats, how to kill Aetherwings, what to do when you need to kill an Aetherwing and it's running away from you. Same with a giant rat. How are you going to deal with lead from the back? Do you have a way to kill a Skaven hero? Because that's a really different challenge than killing chaff units, right? Killing chaff units is lots of factions in the game can efficiently kill a few chaff units in terms of that toughness 3, 8 wound profile. But killing a Skaven hero is all of a sudden toughness 3, 18 wound profile, and you need to figure out sort of, can you do that in one round so that lead from the back doesn't just completely destroy you the next round after that. I think if you're going to a tournament, that's really worth thinking about. So, I would say those are the gatekeepers right now, is sort of thinking about what you're going to do against the challenges those lists provide you. But you also need to be thinking about how the scenarios present in a given tournament are going to mean something to you. I think, if we're looking at the Tome of Champions stuff, I think you must have a 10-inch flyer in your warband or you can't compete. And if we have sort of a more a more with it TO, a TO who kind of understands how the game is played a little bit better, and they kind of skip those missions, then I think that there's a lot of really varied and complicated things to think about that make a tier list important, but not the be all end all. So I hope that you've kind of enjoyed this. I hope that I hope you clicked because you saw a tier list, but I hope that you kind of get a sense of why I think a lot matters for competitive play in Warcry beyond just what factions are good and what factions aren't. Because I think there's a lot of layers to this right now, and yeah, I'm just really excited to see it tested in 2 weeks. I'm really excited to try to get some more events going. If you have a local game store that is considering running events, please let me know how the event went. I'm really interested to try to highlight some of those. I had a ton of fun highlighting the Polish Warcry competitive scene back in the fall, and I really hope I can do the same for other competitive scenes in other parts of the world. You know, I know some folks in the Mid-Atlantic who might be able to get an event going soon. I really hope they do. So yeah, I'd love to get a tournament also in Minnesota sometime soon. Again, I already said it before, but holler at me if you think you might know sort of a place to run one and a game store owner who's, you know, willing to take a chance at letting people try it out. I think it'd be really cool to have a tournament after Adepticon there. So all of that, ton of fun stuff to chew on. Probably I'll have time to do one more video before Adepticon, and then I'm probably going to spend some time reviewing what happened at that tournament, because I think we're going to learn a lot about the game, seeing a lot of different people's perspectives. I'm really hoping that I play against at least one person who makes me change how I think about Warcry. A lot of my sort of Warcry experience can be a bit of an echo chamber, because I go tell people what I think is good. A lot of people play my lists against each other, and, you know, I change some of my opinions based on what they show me. I've certainly changed my opinions based on what happened in the 4 Polish tournaments that happened. But, you know, for the most part, I haven't been exposed to a ton of other people who are testing the game in a really serious way. And so I think at, you know, these next tournaments, I'm going to play 2 tournaments and cover 1. So I'm going to see a lot of other people who aren't me showing me their approach to the game. And I really hope to learn a lot. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.